I'm Ryan Pack.
And I'm Nicole Barlow.
And I'm Brandis.
And this is Soundtrack Your Life, where we talk to a guest about a soundtrack that they feel connected to. Today we have Brad from the Pop Culture Yearbook Podcast. Welcome, Brad.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, Brad, why don't you tell us a little bit about Pop Culture Yearbook?
All right. So Pop Culture Yearbook is a podcast where we love music and we love movies. And so it's me and it's two of my best friends, but there's actually like 3.5 of us because the guy that started it with me decided not to do it after we started. So he comes on every once in a while. But we all go way back and we love music and we love movies and we probably quote movies to an annoying degree. But because of our memories and all that, we love to go back and talk about it. And so what we do is we usually take, for each month, we take one year to focus on. So like, for example, 2002. And then we each pick something that we remember from that year that was important that we liked. And we go rewatch it, we re-listen to it, whatever it was. And then we come on and we talk about it. And in every episode, we also usually have a top five that we create based on like an associated topic to the movie or the album. Or what we've been doing this last season is we do drafting, which makes it a little more fun because then we have to choose and don't always get the ones that you want. And so we talk about a movie and then we make a draft, or we talk about an album and then we make a draft, and we go back and forth. And we have a lot of fun doing it. And we've got, I think, 120 some episodes now. So hopefully there's something out there that would be, you'd be able to find a lot of different stuff, a lot of TV, movies, and music, and hopefully be something you'd be interested in listening to.
And just FYI, listeners, Brad has the best taste.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, definitely when it comes to music, I think I'm definitely kind of on my island there. They're much more the mainstream, and so.
Yeah, when I see your draft polls, I'm like, oh, what did Brad pick? Yep, Brad has the best taste.
Thank you.
Brad also has an excellent podcast voice, which makes me really envious.
Well, that makes me really happy because I hate my voice, and I always feel like it's not good for this particular hobby, but...
I think we all do. I think we all question, like, why did I enter this medium again?
But you just made my day. I don't even care what you say about the movie now.
Now we can fight about beautiful girls.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about the 1996 Ted Demme film, Beautiful Girls. So, Brad, why are we talking about Beautiful Girls today?
All right, well, I have a lot of reasons. So, this is focused on the soundtrack. So I love the soundtrack, and I got so many things I could say here. I don't know where to start. But to me, in the 90s was a time where there was just every movie had a great soundtrack, and there were so many I loved. So the Farrelly Brothers movies like Dumb and Dumber and Kingpin, and they all had good songs in them. And there was a movie called The Commitments in the early 90s that I loved, and Reality Bites was huge, and even Austin Powers had a great soundtrack, and I could go on and on. There's so many that I love, and maybe I should have picked a different one, but there's so many good ones, and I owned them all. And I was in high school and college in the 90s, and I am from a small town in Minnesota, and I went to college at Augsburg College, which is Minneapolis, and it was a 3-hour drive. And so I would go home all the time, and I would just listen to CDs. I'd have my little CD case, my portable CD player with the tape plugged in, and I would just listen to things over and over again. And a couple of these soundtracks just really stuck with me. This is one of them. My second choice was the movie Swingers, which wouldn't have been a better choice, it sounds like. But those two movies just in particular, I really like lumped together. They came out in the same year. They both have a great soundtrack. They both have a band who's in the movie, who's on the soundtrack. They both have guys playing Sega hockey, which I played a lot of video games. And so there's a lot of commonalities between them. And I feel like the soundtracks too, they both have like a range of like older music and newer music and like different kinds of stuff on there that helps to create a good vibe for what that movie was trying to go for. Couple other things, it's a really Gen X movie, and that would describe me very much to the core. I feel like it's a cult classic, which is underappreciated. You guys hadn't seen it, so you'll might agree with me that it's a cult classic to some people, but not the underappreciated part. And finally, the last thing I'll say is it was filmed in Minnesota. It was filmed in Stillwater mostly, and so being from Minnesota, we are very like territorial. We love stuff that's here. We take ownership of it. And so I love a lot of the scenes in it. It's set in the winter, there's snow, it's a small town like I grew up in. It's about this guy who moved away and is coming back. I related to him very much in that way, like going to a reunion. So I really connected to it for all those reasons. But the soundtrack was just something I just kept listening to over and over again, especially in my car driving back and forth. So
Now, do you remember, because we talk a lot about the power of CDs as a format on this show, because I feel like so many of the soundtracks that people are connected to, especially people that are more Gen X, Ryan and I are kind of like on that cusp between the two gens. So, we certainly had like visors full of CDs in our Honda Civics and whatnot. But do you remember buying that CD, like the physical act of going in and being like, I love this movie, I'm going to buy this CD?
I don't, but so at that time I was working at Best Buy. I was in college and I was working at Best Buy in the music department. And so basically I stocked CDs all day. That's what I did. And it was a great job because I love music and I just love to hold CDs and look at CDs and everything. So I'm sure I must have bought it after work one day and taken it home with me from there. But a lot of them I would remember, but that one I don't specifically remember like paying for and leaving with.
I love that you worked at the Best Buy, though. That alone is a great throwback.
Oh, it was great.
That actually fits really well with the whole 90s thing. I definitely do think that music was so much more important, just like in pop culture in the 90s, and took more of a front seat in like, the movie making industry. And so I think that's why there are so many good soundtracks from that era, is they took a little bit more risk. Like the people who are selecting songs were maybe a little bit more making or had the license to make more artistic choices than just like, choices based on like money making. And I think the public was a lot more open to that too. It was definitely like a moment in time. Like think about how many movies in the 90s were set in record stores and, focused on music from like a storytelling perspective, right? So I definitely agree the 90s are very rich for like great soundtracks.
Yeah, and what I do feel like is important is, there's this whole kind of genre of 90s movies, like, like you said, Brad, from like Reality Bites to Singles to Beautiful Girls, that are all about like groups of friends, essentially. They're kind of ramshackle and indie and not manufactured. They're not glossy films, and they feel very lived in, and that's kind of what's cool about them. They have the same sort of aesthetic quality, and their soundtracks have kind of the same tonality to them, and I think that's kind of what people go back to because they feel very lived in.
Well, yeah, I think speaking of being like not glossy, a lot of these movies weren't like big budget movies, but they would spend a huge amount of their budget on the music, showing like, so Dazed and Confused is another one I've written down, which we just did an episode on that. And I mean, that's a huge soundtrack and it's all these old songs, but it cost like, I think it was a quarter of the budget or more just to get those songs in the movie. And so obviously the soundtrack was a big part of that whole thing.
Yeah, and I feel like the soundtrack is a big part of this film as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Obviously there's Sweet Caroline, which everybody knows, which is an important part of the film.
Except for Uma Thurman.
But except for Uma Thurman,
who somehow doesn't know the opening bars of Sweet Caroline, but that's fine.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie,
was really
I was
weird.
not that familiar with that song when that movie came out. It was a song that I kind of like learned about more because of the movie, actually. And I don't know how I missed it, but
yeah, and again, maybe we should backtrack for a second here. So three of us in this call, guess who, had never seen this film before Brad suggested it. You all know the premise of our podcast. Somebody, a guest, picks a movie, and then we watch it. And once in a while, it's a movie we haven't seen, and that's both kind of wonderful and terrifying, because the terrifying aspect is, oh no, what if we're on the same page with our guest? So we all watched Beautiful Girls for the first time. I think we all really enjoyed the soundtrack. I think, like, caveat to the audience, this is a Weinstein era Miramax film, and there are some kind of like squicky, icky kind of depictions of things in here. Natalie Portman is in this film. She's 15 in real life. She's 13 in the film. Her character is 13. And there's some things involving her and one of the male leads that are maybe not so great by any standard, but especially not by 2023 standards. So if you decide to watch this movie, you've never seen it before, I think you kind of have to approach it with that critical eye. Even though the soundtrack is very enjoyable, the movie is a little questionable.
Yeah, definitely.
Questionable elements.
Going back to Brad's point of watching it now versus then, I am seeing it now through the lens of everyone knows Sweet Caroline in 2023. So maybe like back then I can forgive Uma Thurman for not knowing the opening bars, but like second piano stroke, it's like, okay, I knew even like what that was. Come on.
I think by then, maybe it hadn't been played out
Maybe,
in movies by then, because hasn't it kind of become
I
just
don't
like
think so.
one of those things that gets repeated?
Yeah, maybe it's kind of like Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, where in Shrek it was new, and now it's like not
Yeah,
again.
I'd really
Exactly.
never heard that song either until Shrek, or wasn't familiar with it. And yeah, that's now everywhere. Everybody knows that song.
Yeah, and
Yes.
for those that have not seen the movie, maybe but are familiar with the soundtrack or are interested, so the moment comes when the character, Timothy Hutton's character in the movie is playing piano, and he plays Sweet Caroline. He's supposed to be a pianist. He's supposed to be a musician, and so it's kind of this like Top Gun moment where the whole bar starts singing Sweet Caroline, but Uma Thurman doesn't know what it is initially.
I mean, let's talk about the cast. Uma Thurman plays a very small part in the film. She like comes and goes, like literally in this movie. I'm just gonna go back to Chicago.
I would too, personally.
But I mean, there's a lot of big names in this film. There's Michael Rapaport, Matt Dillon. Laruen Holly was pretty big at the time.
Yes, right off of Dumb and Dumber.
Right, Dumb and Dumber, Laruen Holly.
Rosie O'Donnell, I was like here for everything that she was saying in that like CVS like convenience store moment.
Right,
Well-
I wanted her to like shoot a koosh ball though.
That was like a scene too where I think it really fits the time, because she was big at that time. I don't know, maybe you guys, I don't know how old you are and everything, but like you could tell that scene was put in there specifically just to give her that moment, because that's what she does and that's what people wanted to see. And she nailed it. Like she really knew how to do that.
100%. It's Rosie O'Donnell playing
Yes.
Rosie O'Donnell. And
Yeah, it's like Chris Rock in Lethal Weapon 4, where he does
Yeah.
the whole thing about like the rotary phone, and you're like, they needed to give him like
Mhm.
a Chris Rock like stand up.
yeah, she was very much like there in kind of like a bit part, so they could
Yeah.
put her in the trailers. I think that's probably
Mhm.
fair to say.
And then Natalie Portman, like you brought up too. I mean, she was pretty unknown, but I mean, like her role or not, this was really helped kind of catapult her. This was a huge step as far as being an actress and getting known, because it became a decent sized movie, and so she took off pretty soon.
Yeah, I don't know
after.
how many people knew The Professional in
Yeah,
1996.
I think that was the only
Mhm.
one before. So
Right. I think The Professional was maybe even more of an indie flick than this at the time, right? So that would have been her breakout role, and this kind of coasted her to
Yeah, I feel like
stardom.
most people found out about Natalie Portman in The Professional in college, like as one of those big, everyone's passing around the movie in the dorm sort of things. It wasn't like, oh, I saw that in the theater in 1994.
100%. That's how I think of The Professional, as a movie that was passed around in dorms by your film
Yes,
bro
you can
friends.
definitely connect the dots from this film to like Garden State and that whole manic pixie moment. It's like, wow, I can't pin if you're just being like really flighty or if like something is happening. Like I can't pin down what exactly is happening with your character, but this is not normal.
yeah.
Also, I just want to say that her character, again, is 13 in this film. You do not see a parent, I think, at any point in
Nope.
this movie. So you have to really suspend disbelief that she's just like an unattended minor for the duration
And also
of
no
this
parent
film.
is like, why is this like, I don't know, late 20s, 30-year-old, early 30s dude just like talking to her outside of the house like every single day? Like at no point is a parent like,
Yeah,
hey,
like,
how's it going? Who are you?
who is this strange dude like hanging out windows and like leaning on my car trying to talk
Yeah,
to my
getting jealous
13-year-old
about
kid?
like some boy in her class.
She has no
That's
stranger
totally
danger.
fine.
No.
No
Well-
stranger danger at all.
You do see her friends laughing at her. I mean, they can tell it's uncomfortable too when there's the ice skating scene where she like falls into his arms. And so at least it is like addressed in that way, that like they're like looking at her like this is not normal.
Yeah, I love how the 13-year-old kids in the movie have more awareness of how abnormal it actually is than all of Timothy Hutton's friends,
Yeah.
who are just making like various Lolita and like other kind of unsavory, like weird jokes.
Yeah.
Even though it's super not funny.
So I don't want to, I want to talk about the soundtrack, obviously, but I do want to ask: is that like the stuff that you didn't like about the movie? Is that like the main thing, or should we just are there other like lists of things we should get out of the way that you didn't like about it?
I'm gonna go straight to Brandis.
One, you're
Pass the
opening
mic.
with that Miramax logo and EPs, Weinstein.
Well, yeah, I even noticed that this time. Like, that's
Yeah.
probably not a good
No,
start.
two,
Wow, you can't blame them on.
the title, Beautiful Girls. I was like, I can already tell this is going to have a little bit of a sexist tone. Also knowing that it's coming off of the dude who wrote High Fidelity. Didn't feel great about women. 3, yep, the whole movie, at least as far as I made it, hates women. 4, the sexualization of Natalie Portman. And, that pretty much sums it up.
I do want to say though that I think like same screenwriter as Ryan pointed out to me, this and High Fidelity. I think High Fidelity looks like a feminist masterpiece compared to this movie, just by like modern lensing. Like the women in this film are very, very marginalized. Like, and there's such wonderful actresses too that I think since have become much bigger than like Michael Rapaport. You hear a lot more about Natalie Portman and Uma Thurman these days. So that it's funny to like see them so on the fringes. It's very much like, this is a male perspective, very much so. Very much that POV on this story. It's a group of dude friends and you get to see everything through their lens, but you really don't know anything about the women in this movie other than how hot they are.
7.5 across the board.
7.5.
Good, solid.
Yeah, I mean, like, but parts of that are kind of like, okay, like I get that that's sort of, it's just maybe aging a little bit like milk, but mostly for me, it's just like that Natalie Portman aspect is very squicky, very squicky. And it's kind of the only romantic tension in the film in a way, because he doesn't give a shit about his super responsible and very respectable, like, professional girlfriend from New York. He's like, well, I can't wait 20 years for Natalie Portman to grow up, so I guess I'll marry this woman who looks like a 7 and makes dinner. It's kind of what it came down to. And I was like,
and
damn,
doesn't tell him to take the sales job.
Yeah, it was like, oh, damn.
Yeah, no, like back to what we said earlier, in the 90s really had those like approachable, sort of like friends hanging out, like going to small towns, like reunions or whatever. Like I liked that aspect and I don't mind like the male perspective. Like if it was that and that was what the focus was on, like where am I in my career at this point in life, and kind of like lightly touched even on like the relationships, totally here for it. But it's like you're starting out on like bar 1 of just like really like hating on your own relationships, but for no good reason. You know what I mean? There was no like explanation of like, well, why are you unhappy in your relationship? And it's literally just comes down to every single perspective was like, well, my girlfriend's not hot enough. And it's like, okay, well,
right. I love a fuck up. Like I love a group of fuck ups. Like that can be really enjoyable in its own way, right? But there was just like, there was just not a. It was kind of a hard watch.
I agree. I think that it is probably not done nearly in enough detail, but I feel like you're supposed to at least think that Timothy Hutton's character does like grow up while he's there. When he leaves, he's like, he realizes that that's not for him and she is the right one. And that could have been maybe a better movie if they focused more on that. But anyway, I don't know. I'm just trying to
Brad's like
trying to keep it a little positive.
Man,
He's like, stop poking holes in my movie.
I can see them. I can see the holes. It's fine. I think it's funny that you guys hadn't seen it. Like in my head, I'm like, oh, they've all seen it. So of course we all know it. But so that's what makes this so fun.
And it's unfair, really, to watch something like however many years later and be like, well, now we can like put it through like the critical meat grinder in like, the context of Weinstein and all that bullshit. You couldn't have done that in 96, right? So
speaking of meat grinder, the best joke is she's fucking the meat cutter and she's a vegetarian.
Yeah. That was great. And I was like, if I was going to take one of the characters' sides, that I do appreciate the irony. That is ironic.
Yeah. Also, I love Martha Plimpton in like anything. She's great.
Mm-hmm.
The cast is great. And some of the dialogue is really great. Like it's got some really like nice arch, funny dialogue. So
Yeah, and the one that nobody said yet too, Mira Sorvino is Matt Dillon's girlfriend. She's one that hasn't come up yet. So there's so many different characters and great actors that were in it.
It's a stacked cast.
Yeah.
Like the cast is fantastic. Mira Sorvino being in this is funny to me because I'm like, did somebody look at this and go like, oh, Romy and Michelle is also a movie about a high school reunion. Can we put her in that? Seems related. Yeah, the cast is really great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I saw the cast rolling through, I was
An
like
ensemble.
really excited. I was like, oh, all of these people together, this is going to be a lot of fun. And then I was like, wah, wah. From like a music perspective, like, yeah, like super love the soundtrack. I think all of the songs were hitting, although the Sweet Caroline felt a bit weird. But again, maybe that's because I'm looking at it from like 2023. But what was weird to me was the score juxtaposed with the soundtrack. I thought that like standing on its own, the score would be like really, really cool. And I thought like the soundtrack, like love the mixture of like music there. But together it felt like very like not paired up. Because like the songs are just very like chill vibes and like really fit this like laid back, you know, like going home to a small town. And then this the score is like so melodramatic and like sentimental, and it feels like it's telling a different story. And I'm getting a little bit of whiplash. I'm like, over here it's like sentimental and dramatic, and over here it's like more like chill 90s, and it's like back and forth. And I thought that was a little bit interesting.
Yeah, not my favorite score. And they seem to try to incorporate that Pete Droge song, "Beautiful Girls," which is actually a really good song.
I love that song.
I was like really impressed by it. Pete Droge is one of those people that like in the 90s, like I would hear the name and I'd be like, oh, like it seems like a lot of cool people like him, but I just never got into him. He shows up in Almost Famous.
Oh, no way.
The only real things I know him from are this and then Dumb and Dumber. And so that him and Laruen Holly, that connection, like at the same mid-90s they're both in two of these movies that I loved. And but I don't know much about him besides that.
I appreciate that you brought up the Farrelly brothers having like good taste in soundtracks. I think that is overlooked a lot, but their movies usually have really good music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they're fun movies and they're fun songs. You brought up the feel of this. I guess what I liked about this soundtrack too is it's very, a lot of the songs are really like melancholy, and I just feel like it fits the vibe. Like these guys are like, they're sad. They're like kind of pathetic.
Mm-hmm.
They're all going through stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
the girls are dealing with them too. So I always felt like the songs are placed really well in the movie. There's a few that I really like where they're at. But it just, the whole soundtrack just gives me the vibe that I feel like the movie was going for. So that's another reason why I liked it.
It's a very like melancholy winter small town.
Yeah, the winter part is
movie.
part of that.
Yeah, it's weird to watch it in summer.
Yeah, it's 90 degrees outside. Watching
but kind of
these
nice.
people plowing snow.
Yeah, it was like some fun dissonance. I also love that Chris Isaac shows up on the soundtrack.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the reasons why I love this CD, is because he is one of my all-time favorite artists. And so when he came on here, I'm like, well, that's another reason. Maybe that was the reason I actually bought it, even though I already had that song on his album that it was from.
Mm-hmm.
But I really got to know him in '95 with Forever Blue, and then I went back and got everything he had. So this movie just came out a year later, and so like that was all another just timing. Like Chris Isaac is one of my favorites, and he's on this, and then he was on the Tin Cup soundtrack. I think that was just another year later. So another soundtrack that I liked a lot. That one's very different, a little more country-ish.
Yeah, Chris Isaac was really dominant in the 90s, and if you were like a preteen in the 90s like I was, your parents like kind of just thought that he was an Elvis figure, and so they were like totally cool with him even if they were conservative and strict. So I remember being young and buying Forever Blue like off of remember those listening stations with the big headphones that they used to have at like the Sam Goody? Like I'm pretty sure that was the first CD that I ever bought on my own.
Wow.
I love Chris Isaac.
Yeah, he's so good. And I don't know if you've seen him live, but he's amazing.
Long time ago, like in the actual 90s. I love him. I think he's so great. So underrated. Yeah, no, totally. He's super underrated for me. I love him. And when I think of like my misspent 90s teenage years, I think a lot about Chris Isaac. So that was a pleasant surprise.
I will say though, that as many times as I've watched this, and so many of these songs, I said I feel like they really fit where they're at. I don't remember hearing. I don't know when that song is played in the movie. Like that's one that I don't even associate with the movie, other than the soundtrack part.
Do you recall? Because I remember it coming up. I know that it's played in the film, but I
It
can't
must
remember
be.
the exact scene.
I feel a lot of these songs are played like in the car when they're driving. So if you're like paying attention to the dialogue, sometimes you miss the song.
Yeah, there's a few of them, like Beth kisses Beth. I think gets played as he's snow plowing.
He's actually
So
taking the snow away that time instead of pushing it up to her garage, and he's crying. I love that scene. I love.
it's a nice scene. It's a nice scene. It's well executed. It's a good song choice because it also feels very like exactly like what that guy would listen to
Mhm.
in a heartbreak moment.
Because I think earlier in the
While he's
movie,
doing that exact thing.
because he keeps shoving all the snow up to her garage, and I think that's when the Flock of Seagulls plays at least one of those times.
Yes,
Yep.
So
yes.
it's
Iran plays like towards the beginning, and then
yeah,
you get this towards the end. Yes.
it's a nice
Yeah.
showing the difference there.
His only growth in the film.
Yeah, he's kind of annoying. I definitely will agree with that one.
But he plays like the part that Michael Rapaport was born to
Yeah.
play.
Well,
Like
and you
that is-
probably everybody knows a guy like that too. So it's like he's annoying, but it's because he's kind of realistic too.
Yeah, his character felt very real to me. You're totally right. Everybody knows like that guy. I think in some respect, every friend group has that guy, for
Mhm.
better or for worse. So that was very real. I feel like Matt Dillon plays the same character he plays in like several films in the 90s. Almost like there's a whole like Matt Dillon cinematic universe where he plays like the same bum, the same like person in a lot of movies. Very similar characters.
But not in Something About Mary. That's where he
Yeah.
that's where he
Not in
stepped
that.
out. And
No, definitely out of the box and Something About Mary. Yeah, he's a real lout in this movie.
He is kind of allowed to do
I
something
don't
about
get to
Mary,
use that
though.
word a lot, but he's,
Yeah. He just
pretty
plays that
bad.
role well, whatever it is.
He does whatever that like weird area that he occupies is, where you're like you kind of like him because he's like brooding and cool, but then you also hate him because he's just like a terrible person.
But weren't you also happy to see him in Asteroid City? Like when he shows up at the beginning, you're like, ah, it's Matt Dillon.
No, I'm always happy to see a Matt Dillon. Very interesting career, that dude.
Yeah. Because this is a point, like for me, I feel like he had kind of fallen off the map from like when he was younger in the 80s. And then he did this and he did Something About Mary. And it's like that was like a whole renaissance for him. It's like
Yeah.
Matt Dillon's back now.
Are there any songs that you feel like could have been on the soundtrack but aren't? No, it's kind of a weird question.
That's a
but
tough question.
I was thinking about it and I'm like, why does it feel like there should be Counting Crows on this soundtrack, but they're not there?
Okay, well, if you're going to the 90s, yeah. Well, first of all, I think the Chris Isaac song that's on there, I feel like there's other ones that would fit better of his. So that one kind of feels a little bit maybe not the best choice. But I could see Counting Crows on there.
I would agree with that. And
Maybe.
the Afghan Whigs, because they're in the movie, they get 2,
Hmm.
But they're covers.
but they're covers because they're like a bar band in the movie, in the universe of the film.
Yeah, they don't really explain what, but it's a small town, right? And they're playing in the
Yeah,
bar,
they're just
so
there.
you're not getting the Rolling Stones there.
Right. They're the house band.
But they're covering Barry White.
Maybe I could hear like a Gin Blossoms song in there somewhere.
Oh, a Gin Blossom song is such a good call.
So that's my answer.
Well, it's kind of weird because, I mean, I guess with like Pete Droge kind of has a little bit of a throwback sound,
Hmm.
and then the Afghan Whigs are covering like Barry White. So it feels like with the music they're trying not to like make you feel like you're in the 90s.
Yeah.
Like it's in 96, so you just assume you're in the 90s. And I think in Timothy Hutton's room there's some like Larry Bird posters, but I don't think it's supposed to make you like pinpoint what time you're in. Like I guess there's the video game hockey, but
Right.
I don't think they're supposed to necessarily like make you feel like you know what decade you're in when you're watching this movie.
That sounds right. Because yeah, I mean, there's a lot of older songs in there. Some are covers and some aren't, but I mean, those are definitely not from the 90s. And those a lot. Another reason why I like this soundtrack is because a lot of those older songs, like Me and Mrs. Jones, Could It Be I'm Falling in Love, Groove Me, The Stroll. I really didn't know those songs before this, and I loved them right off the bat. So it kind of introduced me to things as well.
It's got a little bit of that Pulp Fiction thing going.
Yeah.
You know, you get introduced to all this music from, you know, decades past that you wouldn't have found on your own because, you know, you didn't have streaming or anything like that.
And I don't know how I went all these years until I was getting ready for this here. I never connected that the guy who's singing That's How Strong My Love is the guy from Fine Young Cannibals, even though you can definitely hear it in his voice. But I just never really made that connection until I was looking into it a little more this time.
So when do I get to go on my big Afghan Whigs rant?
This seems optimal.
When you mentioned doing this movie, the first thing that popped into my head was, oh, isn't that the movie where like the Afghan Whigs are in the movie? Or they have something to do with the movie? And it must have been like from watching like Matt Pinfield or something on MTV, where he probably was like, oh, here's the Afghan Whigs. And by the way, they're going to be in this new movie called Beautiful Girls. That's all I knew about the film. But I was like, oh, Afghan Whigs are in it. Like, I am down to watch this movie and listen to the soundtrack. So the Afghan Whigs they're not from Seattle, though they're kind of known to be part of like that grunge movement in the early 90s. The lead singer's name is Greg Dulli. And so it's interesting that they're doing these like Barry White covers. They're kind of known to be like a rock band. And I guess as a bar band, it's not like they're trying to sound like Barry White. His voice is very different. But he has a kind of a cool career. And in the mid 90s, first there was a movie called Backbeat, which no one knows about, which was kind of about the early years of the Beatles. Right. But they didn't get like, it's an unauthorized like biography version of the Beatles. So they couldn't get any of the Beatles music. So they just put together this band, and it's like Greg Dulli, who did all the Lennon vocals. You had Dave Pirner from Soul Asylum, Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth, and Dave Grohl on drums. And they did I think they did the cover songs the Beatles did, you know, before they got huge, because they didn't write those songs. So you could just cover, you know, Money, and you could, because those are technically not John Lennon songs, right? And so I remember them playing on like the MTV Movie Awards once, and I was like, is that Dave Grohl playing? And then, is that the guy from Soul Asylum? And I remember loving that soundtrack because it was like, oh, I'm kind of listening to the Beatles, but through like all my favorite other bands lens. So he did that in 94, and then in 1995, the Foo Fighters released their first album. And by the Foo Fighters, I mean Dave Grohl.
Mm-hmm.
So you have 12 songs. Dave Grohl plays everything on all 12 songs except one guitar part on the song Ecstatic, and that's Greg Dulli. So he's killing it through these 94 through 96. He's in the Backbeat soundtrack. He's playing on the Foo Fighters record, and then the Afghan Whigs are in this movie. So, you know, I thought it was a pretty impressive 3-year run for kind of a guy that people are not super familiar with, unless like you're a huge music nerd.
Like very under the radar. I didn't know any of that stuff about Backbeat, but I remember Backbeat.
No, and I didn't have any idea that there was anybody else that ever played on that Foo Fighters record, and so I'm glad you know which song it was, because I'm going to ask you that. I mean, that's just awesome, because I mean, I'm a huge Foo Fighters fan, and now I learned a new fact that I didn't know before.
And I think I read an interview with him, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you remember playing on that first Foo Fighters record?" And he's like, "Nope." He's like, I'm friends with Dave, so I'm sure it happened, but
absolutely not.
Nope. So that's kind of a common thing. Like when I interviewed Craig Wedren, I was like, "Oh, you recorded that X-Files movie version of Walking After You with the Foo Fighters, right?" And he was like, "No, maybe." And I was like, "It says in the credits you did." He's like, "I remember playing it on Letterman with them." And I was like, "So you probably recorded it with them. That's why Dave had you do it on Letterman with me." I think so. It was a really busy year for me.
Can't confirm or deny. I think that's what happens when you're prolific.
Oh.
The other thing I learned in doing this, so kind of at the same time as the Afghan Whigs, is the band. It's credited on the CD as Satchel, And I really like the song Suffering. And when that plays, when does that play? That's right after Mira Sorvino blows off Matt Dillon at the party where Laruen Holly comes in. And so it fits there. But I was noticing too that on my Apple Music now too, it says Brad instead of Satchel. And so there's this band that had two different names, and um, apparently um, Stone Gossard was in this band this whole time while he was in Pearl Jam, and I didn't know anything about that either. And I just always liked that song, but I had no idea about any of the background of like who they were. And apparently they changed their name because they tried a name and then it got like it was copyright on it because they were naming kind of after somebody else. And so it was an interesting story to learn about that little song in there.
And once again, that connection back to Pete Droge, because I believe Stone Gossard and Droge have played together too.
And it's fun to find all of these interconnected pieces within 90s films. I think that's why they hold a lot of fascination and nostalgia for people like me who are not necessarily, there. Like I was there, but I was not as aware of some of these things as people that were a little bit older. I don't think things are really done that same way anymore. So like Brandon said earlier, it's not done with the same kind of personal care, and you don't have these collectives of artists that are working in quite the same way. I think things are a lot more risk managed now, let's say. So you don't get this like kind of accidental supergroup that you do in Backbeat. It's not easy to arrange the Afghan Whigs to be in your film, right? So I think that's what's kind of charming about it is you get these like little unexpected surprises that feel very satisfying if you're both a fan of music and movies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I believe the Afghan Whigs are in the movie because Greg Dulli and Ted Demme are just good friends.
Yeah, I think that's what I saw too, right?
This is very dark, but apparently Ted Demme, who is Jonathan Demme's younger brother,
Nephew.
died really young.
Nephew.
Okay, sorry, nephew.
Yeah, he
related.
died in 2002.
He like died really young because he took too much cocaine and like played charity tennis. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, it's
so sad.
The movie he had directed was Blow, which was about cocaine.
Well, not a great precedent for that. Grim facts.
But yes, very tragic.
Before we continue with our episode, here's a word from our sponsor.
Enjoy listening to podcasts and ever wonder, can I make a podcast? But it seems so complicated, and good audio production can take time. What if there was a way to create an amazing podcast easily? Well, now there is. Introducing Podcasting Made Easy from Podtastic Audio. My production team will handle your entire audio production, allowing you to be the star of your show. This is Podcasting Made Easy. How easy? Well, so easy, you don't even have to press record. Now that's easy. Your listeners are waiting. Let's deliver. Sign up for a free strategy call today at podtasticaudio.com/easy.
So after finding out that the movie was filmed in Minnesota, even though it takes place in Massachusetts, I was really amused that Noah Emmerich is both in this film and in Miracle. So it just seems like he likes to film in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. And I love him too. He's another part of the movie I love because he's the most kind of like together. He actually has a family, but then he goes nuts and he's trying to like protect his friends, but he's just an idiot. But I loved him in the 90s. He's in the Truman Show too, and he always shows up with the 6-pack. And he's one of these guys. It's like this character actor that he pops up and you just like him.
Yeah, he's good at playing, competent people, kind of a little dorky.
Yeah, he's the dork here, I think, in their group. At least he's probably not really, but in their eyes, he probably is because he's married and has a kid.
Yeah, him and the proprietor of the inn.
Yeah, we got apps.
We got apps.
I did want to ask you both, how do you feel about Minnesota subbing in for Boston in this instance? Does it bug you because you know your home base so well? You're like, that's not Boston or Massachusetts.
Yeah, I know it's supposed to be set like out in the East, but I'd never really even Like to me, it's a Minnesota movie but there's so much snow. I mean, do they even have that much snow and snow plowing out there? And so it doesn't really bug me, but that's because I kind of just in my own mind, I'm imagining that it is in Minnesota. And
I mean, there are no strong like Massachusetts accents, right? Am I
Natalie Portman tried and it was not good.
tried? But yeah, I had to check twice because I'm like, wait a minute, can't be.
Well, Rapaport always sounds like he's from New York, no matter what he's doing.
Yeah,
Factual.
he's his own thing.
So for me, it's just foreshadowing as a Minnesota sports nerd of Boston just taking all our credit anyway.
That's a very good connection. They get all the success.
I want to say in the beginning of the movie though, there's like I think when Mo is driving Timothy Hutton's character to his dad's house, I think there's a Minnesota state flag.
Yes, I noticed that.
And only we would notice that.
Yeah, literally.
But other than that,
you would notice that. Because
I mean, it's not obvious, but if you know the Minnesota state flag, you can see, oh yeah, there's the flag because you know it's set here, so you're kind of noticing things.
Yeah, see, that's the thing that I was wondering if you guys were clocking bits that felt like very distinctly Minnesota and not at all Massachusetts.
I wasn't trying to, but
I had to go on and like look up some of the locations and double check like where they were. And I mean, that's part of the fun for me too. So
Wikipedia said that part of it was shot in Edina, and I was like, what Edina are you talking about?
I don't know about Edina, but the ice skating was on a lake over like by Lake Minnetonka. So I don't know if maybe they had that mixed up.
And the lake ice skating is a very Minnesota thing.
Yeah, that too.
I don't know if that's a Massachusetts thing.
Doesn't seem like it.
No, I don't think so. We need like a fifth person on this podcast that's from from the Boston area, from the Massachusetts area to confirm.
Yeah, then there'd just be real fighting.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And there might be actual fisticuffs. Duncan could be involved.
Donkeys.
So you had sent this out on a link, but I'd already copied this down to another thing. So I love the soundtrack, but as you watch the movie, there's all these other great songs that aren't on the soundtrack. And I think so many of them are placed at such a great time in the movie too. And that's just another thing. So I don't know, there's a whole list of them there, but like you brought up the Rolling Stones and I love that part. The Fool to Cry. Honey White by Morphine is in there.
Yes.
I love that song.
My personal favorite was that. It was like, is that Morphine? Yeah. So great. And
then we mentioned The Flock of Seagulls, but like, I Got You by the Split Ends is in there.
That's
the
great song.
Greg Kihn breakup song is in there. I mean, just and they're all like such a time where I don't know. Maybe it's because I've seen it so many times, but I love their placement. I love the songs, and when they come on, I get happy and excited. So
I love the thing that I love about living in like this modern age of streaming. I think this is the thing that I love the most is the kind of like crowdsourcing of people pasting together a soundtrack that never actually existed back in the day, but instead taking this like, I'm just going to make a playlist of like the extended soundtrack of the stuff like that that's not officially there. I love that. I love that people like take the time to actually go that deep. It's very satisfying to me. Because it happens a lot where you love something that's on a soundtrack, but it wasn't there in the original CD. So your brain, when you watch a movie, has to be like, I gotta like go find that now. And that's a whole separate side quest.
Well, and that's, I mean, just to kind of maybe off here, but when we first started talking a long time ago I brought up the movie Never Been Kissed. I never owned that soundtrack. there was like 5 songs that are played that I love these songs so much. And then I looked it up and like, you can't get the soundtrack for free. And I didn't know it. So I was going to have to like look it up and put it together. And that's what I would have had to done to try to listen to that. Because a lot of these soundtracks you can't get in like their original form on the streaming sites, at least times I've looked. You only get certain songs.
Right. Yeah. You only get certain songs. And I think the cover aspect of the Afghan Whigs tracks on the CD version, on the flip side of this, I think you can't stream them, if I'm not mistaken. I think there might be some licensing hangups with those songs. You can watch them on YouTube. You can watch clips of them being performed in the movie, but you cannot, I don't think you can stream them.
Probably not.
Yeah, I don't think they've made them available. Like they didn't do some like best of where they shoved them in there or anything like that. Because that's what they do with a lot of Spotify soundtracks. Just make a playlist, even for like Guardians of the Galaxy 3. It's just like Marvel's just pulling a playlist from Spotify. But yeah, those Afghan Whig songs are not available. And that's a real shame.
It is a shame, and that is one of the downsides of streaming. Is like, yes, you have a lot of passionate people that are looking for things, but a lot of times, they're just not available. And so, unless you have that original CD, you are not getting that.
So, Brandis, now that you're back, I just want to let you know that I have completely changed their minds, and we all love this movie.
Nice one.
A good time to mention that Brandis dropped due to technical difficulties, and Brandis, it was great.
Now we are heartbroken that Timothy Hutton did not end up with Natalie Portman.
That's how the movie should have ended.
That would have been weird.
Where is Timothy Hutton these days? Does he still get cast in things? Because I haven't seen him in a bit, and now I'm starting to think there might be a reason.
I think he was on a TV show.
He got
relegated to TNT. Is he as a cowboy show or like a procedural? What is it?
I don't know. Like maybe Lawyers or something?
I think it's a procedural. Yeah, like the promos are kind of like surfacing in my brain right now, and I feel like it might be a procedural.
But he's interesting to me because I knew nothing about him when this movie came out, because he won an Oscar like as a kid, right? And between that and this movie, I don't know anything he did, and I'd never heard of him. So with all these great young people in the cast, he's the one like I kind of knew the least, and then he didn't do a whole lot after either. We obviously, at least not that anybody remembers much here.
No, he's like one of those like recognizable faces where you're like, oh yeah, that guy.
Yeah, he was like Ordinary People.
Yeah, he won the Oscar, right? Didn't he?
Yeah, right.
I think?
Yep, best supporting actor.
He was like in his teens, so it's an interesting career.
I feel like that happens a lot to like child actors, is like they set up these unreasonable expectations when you win at like such a young age, right? And then you're like this prodigy, and then you can just never live up to that standard, and it's kind of like downhill from there.
While you guys have been discussing Timothy Hutton's career, I've been trying to Google what the hell he's doing now, and something came up that says from 2022, Timothy Hutton sues after being dropped from Leverage reboot. I don't know what the fuck Leverage is. Does anyone know what Leverage is?
Leverage is that TNT show.
Yeah, I think it's a TV show. It's probably what I was thinking of.
Yes. I think I've seen like one episode. It is a procedural.
If it's a show about lawyers and he's suing, that's funny.
I don't think so, but it's possible.
No, I think it's more about like getting dirt on people to use as leverage before it gets to like an actual courtroom.
It's still kind of funny.
Yeah.
But it was during that whole phase where it's like TNT means drama.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
But the last thing that he did that I recognize is he was in that Timothy Chalamet movie, Beautiful Boy.
Oh, yeah.
I watched that movie.
Which was like the most depressing thing that's come out in a while, at least that I've seen.
That's why I haven't seen it.
I was waiting because Martha Plimpton has such a very like specific energy, and I was kind of waiting for that energy to turn, and it never really did. I think I wanted all the women in this movie to be a lot angrier than they were. And again, it's because I know too much about their like later careers, so I think I was kind of projecting a little bit onto this like super early career film for a lot of these actresses.
Mm-hmm. What is that like Christian Slater movie that's like high school and it's like
Heathers?
Yes, Heathers. I wanted the film to go like full Heathers, like at the end.
Everybody dies at like the high school reunion.
Yeah, full Grosse Pointe Blank where someone's actually an assassin.
Rapaport runs him over with a snowplow and he lives.
It's like a Fargo moment, like somebody gets this wood chipped. Yeah, like that's.
Yeah, there were so many dramatic, like cinematic shots on this snowplow that I'm like waiting for it to like come to resolution. Right? It's like Chekhov's gun. It's like where's the snowplow?
I did kind of want a grimier ending in a way, but again, like Trainspotting fans, maybe I just like hate myself or love old.
Or maybe even a more uplifting ending where they need the snowplows to like save the city from like the snowstorm, and then they all become heroes.
Yeah. Okay, well, this is why we're not screenwriters, first of all.
I do love, so one guy we haven't talked about, because I don't even know what his name is, but he plays Kevin. He's the little guy in the friend group. He's like my favorite character. And speaking of the ending, I just love when he drives by and says, "Stay cool forever." That's just, I say that all the time to my friends, and I just love that guy. So
Honestly, justice for Kevin. Yeah, Kevin deserves.
Yes, I did.
He's like the Steve Buscemi of this movie.
good. That's
Kevin
a good one.
deserved more.
Yes, I did enjoy his lines. He was good.
Shut up, Donnie.
A spin-off for Kevin.
That would be great.
Yeah.
So, have you seen October Road?
I've never heard of that.
So
Sounds familiar.
yeah. So I mean, I'm reading this off of Wikipedia, which is not always the most reliable source, but Scott Rosenberg, who wrote the movie, and I guess this is like loosely based off of like his friend group. He wrote a show called October Road and came out in 2007, 2008. The show is loosely based on what happened after Beautiful Girls came out and how his friends reacted to a movie about their lives.
Super meta.
Yeah, that time I wrote that thing about you being a total pedo, how did you feel about that?
Now I kind of have to
That
watch
sounds
this and see
awkward
like how
as
it went.
hell.
So that's an actual movie that was really. Oh, here it is.
It's a TV show.
TV show.
A short-lived one, it seems like. Or was it intended to be like a limited series where he just harassed his friends about stealing their lives and selling them for profit?
But it's a drama, so it's not even a reality show.
I'll have to at least look that one up and see a little more
So
detail.
it's a drama about how his friends reacted to this movie that he made. So it's like adaptation, the TV show.
But didn't they make a TV show following that of how they reacted to the TV show about their reactions? Is the question.
Yeah, I'm sickly fascinated by the idea of October Road. I kind of want to watch it because, again, I think I hate myself. So,
I mean, Tom Berenger's in it, Laura Prepon.
Wow.
Like, there's some like a
Okay.
there's some
Brandis
names.
is like, you had me at Laura Prepon.
You did. I'm in.
What I found interesting about this guy, Scott Rosenberg, is that a lot of these movies he wrote were like action or like these kind of like, you brought up a few of them, but then he was big in the Jumanji movies, which seems like a totally different.
Right. I brought
It's
it
like,
up
how
in the
can
cool.
you be simultaneously the writer for Con Air, High Fidelity, and like Jumanji 2? In what world? I guess.
Yeah, not even the first Jumanji.
I say
the
this
two
a
new
lot,
ones.
but like, get your bag. I can only respect it if you have that level of versatility. I wish I could sell myself out like that. I would love to have some Jumanji.
Are you
money.
fans of the Jumanji movies?
I love the first Jumanji. I don't know what you're talking about selling out. If you're talking about the original
No, I'm talking
ones,
about the new one.
then
No, we're talking about the ones with The Rock.
Oh,
and
never
Kevin
mind.
Hart.
Forget it.
Oh my
I
God.
thought you were talking about like
great.
original Robin Williams.
Yeah, they're fun. They're good popcorn
So
movies.
funny.
Okay, totally
The
different.
things
No,
that you
not here
really
for
want to
Rock.
go to bat for. Shrek, no. Original Jumanji, absolutely.
100%.
I never know which way you're going to swerve, Brandis.
I mean, Brandis like famously on our podcast hates Jack Black. So
Oh.
Jumanji, the new ones are very much a
man,
hard
I
pass
love-
for her.
Yes.
I mean, I get he can go both ways, but there's some. I just love him in some things at least.
Too much.
She's okay with him
Okay,
in
good,
School
because
of Rock,
that's
I
the
think.
best right there.
Yeah.
That's
I can tolerate School of Rock because like that's his character, that's who he's supposed to be. But anything else, I'm like, you could have cast anyone else for this part.
This is a different podcast. We're not talking about Jack Black today. We're not doing this today. Not in the era of Peaches.
I've been out, so I don't know what you guys have talked about.
I feel
and
like
haven't
we did
talked
almost the whole soundtrack part without her, so maybe
about. Sweet, yeah, you just cut me out of the whole thing.
throw out a few of your thoughts on the songs you liked or didn't like.
I felt pretty good about all of like the songs. Like I said, the only thing that stood out to me was the weird juxtaposition with that and like the score. But even like I said, the score on its own, if I was just watching the score, then I would have liked that too. It was just the juxtaposition of the two was like a little weird. And I don't know that I loved the placement of like the opening original song, but I liked the song. It was Just kind of a weird cold open, I thought.
I think I just don't like the graphics on the screen, but it was the
Mhm.
90s, so I can't nitpick too much at how what fonts they used.
No, yeah, you can't pick at that. That was a weird moment in the 90s for those. In early 2000s, even worse.
So rumor is, or I guess it's confirmed, that James L. Brooks was at one point attached to direct the movie. I feel like it would be a very different movie if James L. Brooks was the director.
I didn't know that one.
And then I guess Leslie
Oh,
Mann,
I love
who
her.
people know better, and who I guess after like 2005 became just, Judd Apatow's wife. She was possibly going to be in the film. I assume she would probably have been one of the girlfriends, either Rapaport or
Maybe the Mira
she would have been
Sorvino part.
Laruen Holly's character.
I love how we have to talk about this
Or
movie
maybe-
is she'd just have to be one of the pile of girlfriends that never really get developed. I want to know who she was going to be and didn't get cast for, like what part, because she's like a scene stealer. She's so fantastic. How do you hide her?
Well, I bet. So I don't. The one girl that's their friend, she's not a big name. I can't think of who she is. Maybe that was the role. Because it's like Mira Sorvino and Rosie O'Donnell, and then there's the other
shorter
one.
hair,
Mhm.
yeah.
And I'm not really sure who she is.
Yeah.
but I could see Leslie Mann in that part.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that would have been, I mean, she would have made it better, I think.
Or maybe she would have been an age-appropriate next-door neighbor.
She would have been younger.
Starring
At that time.
Leslie Mann as the age-appropriate next-door neighbor.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about Ted Demme's direction. I feel like there is definitely some similar DNA with High Fidelity, and that was directed by Stephen Frears, who I think is a very good director. I think this movie could have been. I think I could have seen it the way Brad sees it if it was maybe in a better director's hands, and if they axed the Natalie Portman thing.
I think axe the Natalie Portman thing. I mean, keep all the music in play, obviously, because I think the sensibilities around that were correct. And that's probably why, it maintains a level of popularity, because it feels within the universe, it feels right. But axe the Natalie Portman stuff, for sure. And then, I don't know, maybe like a less quiet lead. I think the thing about Timothy Hutton is he's a very like naturalistic actor. I don't know, like High Fidelity kind of coasts by on charm. It's a very different movie. There are aspects of that
Yeah, but
definitely make me mad, right? But I also can't hate it because John Cusack is so great in it.
Mhm.
But you texted me yesterday. You said Timothy Hutton is like a charmless John
He
Cusack.
is though, kind of, because the ultimate conclusion is the same. Like, well, I guess I'll grow up and I will settle for someone who is stable and here, even though I kind of hate them. Which is such a sad conclusion to make about your own life. Like, fuck, that's dark. That's darker than anything in Trainspotting.
Trainspotting is the sequel to this film.
Settling for someone that you just kind of think is okay, right? That's gonna like cook you dinner and be a solid 7.5, and everybody knows that you're just kind of like with them because they're there, is grim.
So you don't think he sees her any differently at the end of the movie than when he was talking to the friends?
I don't know. It's hard. I don't really see the growth. I
think you have to kind of imagine it, but
yeah, it's a big leap.
I-
It's also like a day.
Yeah, I know.
Between him like actively flirting with 13-year-old Natalie Portman and then deciding like, well, I guess I'm going back to the city with my pantsuited girlfriend who is just good enough.
How hard do you think it was for them to cast the girlfriend? Like, oh, we got to find someone that has to be like desirable enough, but also within the realm of possibility of him not wanting to.
Well, this is where I'm like, I would never make it as an actor because man, those casting sessions must have been brutal.
Can you be 10% less attractive?
But then also simultaneously 10% more attractive, maybe a little more subservient too. Can we do that? Can we see what it looks like when you whisk? Yeah, tough one. Yeah, no, and they picked an actress who's another one of those. She's like the that guy, but the that girl of the 90s. Like I know her face, but I
Annabeth
also
Gish.
like. Yeah, thank you. But for the life of me, I can never remember her name.
She was, yeah. Well, I forget what she was in because I don't know her very well either. But I know her name. Like it's just somebody you recognize, but I couldn't tell you what else she's in. I can't think of it.
Exactly, and I think that's kind of the perfect casting, right? Like you kind of don't
That's
remember
true.
her.
Mm-hmm.
Am I the only one that wanted more time at the reunion?
Yeah, I was
Yes.
pissed that they didn't go to the reunion. I'm like, wait a minute, that's supposed to be the climactic whatever. I'm not expecting like a whatever, like stereotypical showdown, but like they could have spent
Well,
a few more minutes.
And
right?
actually, as I was watching it, did most of those guys even ever get to the reunion?
No,
Because they were all like
it's
pre-gaming, and then the fight happened, and then they go, I don't think they even made it, period.
no.
Yeah, Matt Dillon was just
Rich
going to
Man,
watch
Poor
Rich
Man.
Man, Poor Man back to back,
Oh,
which I thought was a great little character
Matt
detail. I'm just
Dillon.
going to watch it back to
I'm
back.
so-
You got to watch it with the commercials
Oh my
and
god,
everything.
I'm so mad at the end. Like again, like you can't be mad at characters of the movie. This is just like the way the story is told. But like so mad at the end that he gets like the shit beat out of him. But the girlfriend, Mira Sorvino, comes back even though he's been like cheating on her. It's so bad. Like wow, consequence-free Matt Dillon.
Well, and minor consequences for Laruen Holly.
Yeah, that's
You were mean as a
That
snake.
could. I also wanted a more satisfying conclusion for that. Right? It's like that didn't really get. It just didn't feel like enough.
Mm-mm.
I think in all aspects.
I can see all that.
I don't know.
Annabeth Gish, by the way, was in Mystic Pizza with Julia Roberts. That's like her most well-known role, probably.
Mystic Pizza.
But that was quite a while before this movie came out, so.
I think that's one of the best movie titles of all time.
Beautiful Girls?
It's so great that it's like an automatic
I
punchline
missed a
almost,
pizza.
you know? Yeah. It's fun to say.
So what else do we need to do to this movie to make it?
I think you covered it.
No,
Yeah.
but I'm saying I think that I think there could have been a lot more of these guys
Well, I think
showing growth if they had gone to the reunion. I think if they spent more time there, I think we would have maybe gotten the pieces we needed
better
to
ending.
kind
And I
of
think
be on
maybe what
board.
it is they're trying to
Yeah.
weave too many different storylines and treat them all kind of equally. And if you maybe had like one kind of that was more so given time to, maybe that would help.
Honestly, I think it's just like one thing. I think that the premise like started out in a good place, and I think that you had the right like 90s vibe, you had the right music. I think even the director could have done something amazing with it if you had a different screenwriter who clearly had some sort of like thing with his ex-girlfriend and just started hating women and then like wrote that into the whole story. So you just change that element, but you still keep it the whole premise. Just
If you
someone else
change
with
the
a different
screenwriter
life.
who had
All right,
based
here's-
this on his own
Here's
life,
what we're keeping. Minnesota.
Yes.
You're keeping Minnesota. You're keeping this guy who like went to the big city, like away from his small town and his friends. He's at a crossroads in his life. He's trying to make a decision. He goes home, and various things playing out with his friends who stayed home make
Okay.
him realize that he needs to take the
So
next
you
step.
just summed up everything you just said and why I love this movie, because that is all the stuff I can relate to. The friend group, the
Yeah.
Minnesota, going home, being in a small town. Those are all the
Yeah.
things that appealed to me. I love Natalie Portman in it because she's so good, but that was always weird. Like I get that. It was weird. They really towed the line from like, this is too bad to like, it's just maybe not quite too creepy, but it's not great. So,
It's not very
No,
good.
all of those like bullet points
but she's
would make
great.
a
She's such a
great
good
film.
actress, and it was like the first time I'd seen her. So I'm like, oh man, this girl is great. So
yeah, you
I
definitely
fell in love
can
with her
tell
as the
that she's
actress,
gonna be
not
a
as the
star.
role. Obviously,
Of
that
course.
was
No,
the
she's
difference.
absolutely
Yes.
captivating. She's like always been an enormous talent from the get-go.
Mhm.
And you can't say that about very many people. But the problematic aspect of that is kind of like the Weinstein aspect of that, right? Like that probably shouldn't have happened to her at 15.
I just didn't realize it was going to go down. I thought it was just going to be like she was just going to be like Home Improvement. She was going to be the neighbor on the other side of the fence where he just like
Just see
tells
her hat.
tells the problems, and and then she is this old soul who's wiser beyond her years. But instead it was like, oh, I would like marry her if she was like 10 years older. It's like, what?
That's that role could have been the same, where she could have just played like an old soul who guided him to getting better and growing up, but without any of that other
Totally.
element.
And we've seen that kind of dynamic in movies before, and that I think can be like a very valuable storytelling device, right? But the way it was played is super gross. It's bad.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, it's like you have that kid who just speaks plainly, bluntly, like says the things that you need to hear. Like that's a totally like valid, like
precocious kid next door. The home improvement thing is killing me. And Ryan's watching it, just like expecting like.
Just give her that floppy hat.
The floppy hat, the like bucket hat, and the.
Well, Mr. Feeney, home improvement, like it's all over the 90s. Just having that neighbor next door to like talk some sense into you.
Yeah, and I think it could have had that and stayed there, and forces behind the scenes took it to a place that it just did not need to go. And unfortunately, I think it kind of sullies an otherwise wonderful little movie with a lot of great writing and a lot of great aspects. So suck that out. Keep Minnesota.
Right. So we got it. So I've always wanted to write a screenplay. So now I've got my idea. I've got all your notes. And that's what I'm going to go do.
And look, you've already convinced Nicole this was a great film.
It's in there.
Suck that out. Great movie.
I am coming around a little bit more. Poor Brad. Brad's like, you've ruined my past, my future.
I'm not upset. I think it's fun. It's more fun this way. I will say, because I know the movie, I know what's in it, but I'm not even, when the Miramax thing popped up at the beginning, I did like right away think, oh shit, this is one of those, huh?
But it's unavoidable also.
I know, and none of it's not their fault. But.
Right? Miramax and Weinstein have thumbprints on almost everything that we love from the 90s and 2000s. So it's very difficult to avoid. It's not like we can totally institute like a no Weinstein policy. Like I'd love to for a lot of reasons, but that's, not what this is. You have to just, evaluate it based on then and now and what you like and what you don't, and try to tell your listeners that you're not cool with certain aspects of the movie. So like, don't come for us on the internet. Don't drop into Twitter.
So if our listeners want to find Pop Culture Yearbook, how can they find you guys?
We are on all the main ones. So if you go Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, it's at Pop Yearbook. Take out the culture, just add Pop Yearbook, and we're all on there. And from there, you can find anything you need. And there's a link to we have a link tree with all our other links to everything as well. You cannot find us on TikTok anymore because we were banned. So if you had followed us on TikTok, wondered what the heck happened, it's bizarre. I don't get it. So a little upset about that one because we had like 20,000 followers. I'm like, this is great. And then all of a sudden it was just gone. So we're on everything else. Oh, we're on that new Threads too. I haven't posted anything, but we're on there. Pop Yearbook.
Very cool. And then you guys are monthly with episodes?
Every week. We go 1 year a month, but we go every Monday we're out.
Very cool.
So like next month, we will be doing 1980, I think. Or is that 2 months? Anyway, there'll be 4. There's always 4 straight from the same year.
Okay. So August is going to be the 1980s?
No, actually I got it wrong. It's 2018 is August, and then 1980 is September.
Okay, cool. Well, check them out. I've been listening to their podcast for a long time. Took us a while to get this episode going, but I'm glad we finally did.
Thank you for listening. I enjoy listening to yours too. And it's good to hear, like I heard the Shrek one the other day. It's good to hear that. I appreciate the banter. So
we really are friends, I promise.
No, and I never get the sense that you're not. So it's done very well.
And now we're all in the same circle of trust. You're in the trust tree now, Brad.
Thank you. I love being on.
Well, and you can find us on Twitter at soundtrack_your and on Instagram at soundtrackcast. And this will be our first episode in August. So,
right.
Well, thank you again, Brad.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks for being such a great sport.
Yeah.
I had fun.
Yes, thank you.
It's a great chat.
And if we do another episode with you, we will let you know if we've seen it or not.
That'd probably be a
before
good
we
start
agree
right
to it.
there.
We could do the
All right,
vacations for the next one.
I'd love to.
Yeah, we said
Ooh.
And I understand that, like I said, I didn't know you guys had never seen it. So seeing it now for the first time, I mean, I can see that. That it makes sense more than if you had seen it back then, maybe.
again. I feel like we're gonna need to change some things now. Like Ryan's gonna need to tell people when we've never watched a movie, like, hey, please feel yourself for like what our weird opinions are gonna be on this thing that we've never seen. Especially
me. I come in with my own warning before the podcast. My superpower is ruining things for people.
Yeah, anytime Brandis is going to be on the podcast, I should be like, just so you know, Brandis is going to be
Yeah,
there.
she's gonna hate it, and then she's gonna bring up how she hated everything that we've ever made her do for this podcast.
I feel like there's at least one movie that I said I liked at some point. There has to be.
But it makes it more fun.
You liked
I
Moulin
like-
Rouge.
yeah. I like
Yeah, you like
Moulin Rouge.
Moulin
I'm the only person in the world who likes that.
But it's a lot more fun when we
Mhm.
when we debate. Like, how boring is it when we're all like, loved it?
is. So
Mhm.
we did a thing with the vacation movies because I love the vacation movies, but we have one friend who loves European Vacation the best of the four, and we're like, that's like the worst
That's
movie ever.
wrong.
But he came on and he gave a very understanding reasoning for why, because he saw it first, and it was these little
Yeah.
things, and I didn't agree with him at all. But it was fun to hear him argue it, and like I got a different perspective, and that's kind of what's happening right here.
The only scene I've seen from that movie is the roundabout scene. And I think about that every time that I'm on a roundabout. Although for the record, I am very pro roundabouts. I love them. But I think about that movie
That's
every
one
time.
of the only that's one of the only memorable parts of that movie. So
And soundtrack wise, Holiday Road is
oh
one
yeah.
of my favorite
Oh, top
Christmas songs.
banger. So good.
Christmas Vacation has a good soundtrack too.
Oh yeah.
Ray Charles.
Yeah. Hmm.
That's so funny. You need to tell your friend he's objectively wrong, but it's good to be
we've told him
confident about things.
many times.
So thank you, Brad, for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sorry we ruined your favorite or one of your
No,
favorite movies.
it gives me a new perspective of which to grow from, growth mindset.
Yes,
So
thanks for letting us abuse you for a few hours.
I know.
I'm sure it made it much more interesting to be a part of or to listen to as well. So
I feel like we just set fire to like all of the 1990s. So we're very sorry to
yeah,
Brad.
and hearing that Brandis doesn't like any movie, that makes me feel better. So
You should. You're in good company, honestly.
I don't feel
Beautiful
as
Girl,
attacked personally.
Great company.
Thanks for joining us this week on Soundtrack Your Life. Make sure to visit our website, soundtrackyourlife.net, where you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too.